You keep calling it laziness, but that is not what it feels like. Because part of you does want to change. Part of you does care. Part of you does make plans. You think about waking up earlier, about going to the gym, about studying, about finally becoming more disciplined. And for a moment, it even feels real. You imagine a different version of yourself, more focused, more consistent, more in control. Then the moment comes. The alarm goes off. The work starts. The book is open. The laptop is there. And suddenly, something in you pulls away. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. Enough to delay. Enough to check your phone first. Enough to say, I'll start in 5 minutes. Enough to break the promise again. This is the part people misunderstand. They think discipline is about being strong, about trying harder, about forcing yourself to do what weak people avoid. But if that were true, you would have fixed this already. Because you have tried. You have made plans. You have watched the videos. You have promised yourself that this time would be different. And still, the same pattern returns. That matters. Because when a pattern keeps repeating, it usually means the problem is deeper than motivation. This is not just about effort. It is about design. Your brain was not built to chase abstract goals. It was not built to care about the person you want to become 6 months from now. It was built for something much simpler: comfort, energy conservation, immediate reward, relief now. That is why the couch feels convincing. That is why your phone feels magnetic. That is why distraction feels natural and discipline feels artificial. Your brain does not hate your future. It just prefers what is easy in the present. This is where most people start attacking themselves. They call themselves lazy, undisciplined, weak, broken. But that shame usually makes the problem worse. Because now you are not only struggling with resistance, you are also carrying self-contempt. And that becomes another reason to escape. So the loop continues. You avoid the task. You feel guilty. You promise to do better tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, and the same invisible force pulls you back into the easier option again. This is the real frustration. Not that you do nothing, but that you can see the better life clearly and still fail to move toward it in the moments that matter. That gap begins to change how you see yourself. You stop trusting your own intentions. You stop respecting your own plans. You start thinking, maybe you are just not one of those people. Maybe discipline belongs to someone else. But that thought is dangerous because it turns a design problem into an identity. And once that happens, every failed morning starts to feel like proof. Proof that you cannot change. Proof that you are behind. Proof that something is wrong with you. But what if the opposite is true? What if the problem is not that you are weak, but that you have been using the wrong model of discipline this whole time? What if discipline is not something you force, but something you build? What if the most disciplined people are not better than you, just better at shaping the conditions around their behavior? That changes everything. Because now, the question is no longer, why am I like this? The question becomes, what is this system doing to me every single day? And once you see that clearly, you stop moralizing the struggle. You stop turning resistance into a personality flaw. You start looking at it for what it really is: a brain following the path of least resistance. In this video, you are going to understand why discipline feels unnatural, why willpower keeps failing you, and how to make the right actions easier instead of endlessly trying to force them. Because the real issue is not whether you want to become disciplined. You do. The real issue is whether you are still trying to win against your own brain, instead of learning how to make it work for you. The invisible problem is not laziness. It is friction. That is what most people never see. They think the battle is happening inside them, inside their character, inside their level of discipline. But a lot of the time, the real battle is happening around them. In the room, on the phone, in the routine, in the way the day is set up. You wake up with a goal. Maybe you want to train. Maybe you want to study. Maybe you want to work on something that actually matters. But then real life appears. Your clothes are not ready. Your desk is messy. Your phone is beside you. Notifications are already pulling at your attention. The task feels big. The reward feels far away. And just like that, the brain makes its choice. Not the best choice. The easiest one. This is the pattern. People imagine discipline as some heroic inner force. A person sitting there, resisting every temptation through pure strength. But that picture is false. Because self-control is weak when the environment is working against you. You can feel motivated for a few minutes, maybe even for a day. But if your environment keeps making the wrong behavior easier, you will keep drifting back to it. Not because you are stupid, not because you do not care, because your system is pulling you in that direction. That is the part almost nobody wants to admit. A lot of your behavior is not chosen in some deep, meaningful way. It is triggered by what is visible, by what is close, by what is convenient, by what removes effort. If your phone is always in reach, you will use it more. If junk food is always visible, you will eat it more. If your work is hidden, delayed, or difficult to begin, you will avoid it more. Not every time, but enough times to shape your life. And that is what makes this serious. Because discipline is not usually lost in one dramatic failure. It is lost in tiny moments. The book left in a drawer. The shoes not prepared the night before. The laptop opened next to 5 distractions. The decision that has to be remade every morning. That is where consistency dies. Not in a lack of ambition, in bad design. This is why some people look disciplined from the outside. It is not always because they are stronger. A lot of the time, their life is simply arranged better. The right choice is easier. The wrong choice is harder. Good behavior is visible. Bad behavior has more resistance. So the brain follows the setup. That is what people miss when they compare themselves to someone disciplined. They see the result. They do not see the structure underneath it. They do not see the clothes already laid out. The phone left in another room. The same wake-up time every day. The meals prepared in advance. The desk that is ready before the work begins. They think they are looking at character. Sometimes they are really looking at architecture. This matters more than it seems. Because once you believe discipline is only about inner strength, you keep blaming yourself for problems your environment is creating. You keep saying, I need more motivation. I need to stop being lazy. I need to be harder on myself. But harder is not always smarter. Sometimes, the real answer is much less dramatic. Make the good habit visible. Make the bad habit less available. Reduce the number of decisions. Lower the effort needed to begin. Because the start is where most people lose. Not the whole workout. Just putting the shoes on. Not writing for an hour. Just opening the document. Not studying all night. Just sitting down without your phone. This is where the invisible problem reveals itself. You are not failing because you cannot do hard things. You are failing because too many of your important behaviors begin with unnecessary resistance. And the brain notices that immediately. It asks one silent question. Which option costs less? Then it moves toward that one. That is why social media wins so often. That is why comfort wins so often. That is why distraction keeps beating intention. Not because those things are more meaningful, because they are easier to enter. This is what you need to see clearly. Every habit has a doorway. And if the doorway to the right behavior is too narrow, too messy, too far away, or too mentally expensive, you will delay it. Meanwhile, the doorway to the wrong behavior is already open. That is not a discipline problem. That is a design problem. And once you understand that, something changes. You stop asking, "How do I force myself?" And you start asking, "How do I remove resistance from the life I actually want?" That question is better, more honest, more useful, because now you are no longer trying to become a different person through pressure. You are trying to make the right action easier for the person you already are. That is the beginning of real change. Not self-hatred, not guilt, not another promise made at night and broken in the morning. Just a new understanding. Your environment is not neutral. It is training you. Every object, every routine, every cue, every convenience, it is pushing you somewhere. The question is whether it is pushing you toward the life you say you want or away from it. And once you see that, discipline stops looking like a personal mystery. It starts looking like a system problem. And systems can be redesigned. In the next section, we go deeper into that. Because it is not enough to remove friction. You also need to understand how behavior becomes automatic, how actions get attached to cues, how routines take over, how your brain can be trained to act before doubt even has time to speak. That is where discipline starts becoming real. Even when everything makes sense, most people still don't act. That's the confusing part. You understand the problem. You see the distractions. You even try to fix your environment. And still, the habit doesn't stick. Why? Because behavior is not controlled by intention. It is controlled by patterns. Automatic ones. Your brain does not run on decisions. It runs on loops. Simple loops. Cue. Action. Reward. That's it. And these loops are already everywhere in your life. You wake up, you check your phone, you sit down, you open something familiar, you feel bored, you reach for stimulation. You don't think about it. It just happens. This is what makes habits powerful. But it's also what makes change difficult. Because when you try to build discipline, you are not just adding a new action. You are competing with existing loops that are already faster, easier, and deeply wired. That matters. Because the brain always prefers what is familiar over what is correct. This is the pattern. You tell yourself, "I'll start working." But the moment you sit down, your brain looks for the closest loop it already knows. Not the one you planned. The one you've repeated the most. So without even noticing, you open the same app, scroll the same feed, follow the same path, and only after a few minutes, you realize what happened. This is not lack of discipline. This is automation. And automation always wins over intention. This is where most people make the wrong move. They try to fight the habit directly. They say, "I just won't do it." But that creates friction. And friction triggers resistance. And resistance drains energy. So eventually, the brain goes back to what is easy again. This is the mistake. You don't break habits by fighting them. You break habits by replacing their position in the loop. This is where something important happens. Instead of trying to create a completely new behavior from nothing, you attach it to something that already exists. Something your brain already trusts. Something automatic. This is how you bypass resistance. This is how you stop relying on motivation. This is how discipline starts to feel effortless. Not because the action is easy, but because the start becomes automatic. This is the shift. You stop asking, How do I force myself to do this? And you start asking, where can this fit into what I already do every day? Because every day, you already have anchors. Moments that repeat without thinking. Brushing your teeth, making coffee, sitting at your desk, leaving the house. These moments are stable, predictable, reliable, and that makes them powerful. Because if you attach a new action to one of these anchors, you remove the need to decide. And the moment you remove the decision, you remove hesitation. For example, after you brush your teeth, you do 2 minutes of something important. After you sit at your desk, you open your work immediately. After you make coffee, you read 1 page. Small actions. Almost insignificant. But that is the point. Because starting is the hardest part, not continuing. Once you begin, something changes. Momentum appears. And momentum is stronger than willpower. This is what people underestimate. They think discipline is about intensity, big actions, big effort, big changes. But real consistency comes from something much quieter. Small actions, repeated at the same point in the day, until they stop feeling like a choice. That is when the brain stops resisting. Because now the behavior is no longer new. It becomes part of the loop, part of the pattern, part of you. This is where discipline shifts from effort to identity. Not because you decided to change, but because your behavior started happening before doubt had time to interrupt it. That's the real advantage. Not motivation, not excitement, timing. You act before your mind negotiates you out of it. That is what automatic behavior gives you. And over time, these small attachments build something larger. A chain. One action leading to another. One habit reinforcing the next. Until your day starts organizing itself around the behaviors you once struggled with. This is how discipline actually forms. Not through pressure, through repetition inside a structure. But there is still one problem left. Even when habits are structured, even when actions are small, even when the system is clear, people still procrastinate. They still delay. They still avoid. Which means something deeper is happening. Not in the action, but in how the brain evaluates it. Because every habit follows invisible rules. Rules that determine whether the brain accepts it or rejects it. And if you don't understand those rules, you will keep building habits that fail quietly. In the next section, we break that down. Why procrastination is not what you think, and why most habits fail before they even begin. Procrastination looks like avoidance, but that's not what it is. It's evaluation. Your brain is constantly asking one question: is this worth doing right now? And the answer is almost never logical. It's emotional, immediate, automatic. That's why you can know something is important and still not do it. Because importance is long-term, but your brain lives in the present. This is the split. You think in goals. Your brain reacts to experience. You think about who you want to become. Your brain cares about how something feels right now. This is where most people get stuck. They believe they are failing because they lack discipline. But in reality, their brain is rejecting the task. Quietly, consistently, and for predictable reasons. Every action you try to take is being filtered through invisible rules. Not moral rules. Biological ones. If the action is unclear, you delay it. If it feels boring, you avoid it. If it feels difficult, you postpone it. If it gives no immediate reward, you replace it. This is not weakness. This is how the brain protects energy. But here's the problem. Most of the things that actually move your life forward don't feel good at the start. Studying, Training, working deeply, building something, they are slow, uncertain, effortful, and the reward is far away. So the brain looks at that and quietly says, no. Then it offers you something better, something easier, faster, more predictable. Your phone, a video, a scroll, a small hit of relief. This is the trade happening all day, not between good and bad, between delayed reward and immediate relief. And immediate relief wins most of the time. This is the pattern. You sit down to do something important. There's a moment of tension, a small discomfort, not pain, just resistance. And in that moment, your brain offers an exit. Check something first. Start in a minute. Do something easier. And if you accept that once, it becomes easier the next time, then easier again, until avoidance becomes automatic. This is where procrastination becomes identity. You start saying, I'm just not disciplined. I always delay things. This is just how I am. But that is not true. You are not avoiding action. You are avoiding friction. And your brain is helping you do that perfectly. This is the uncomfortable truth. You are not failing randomly. You are following a system that is working exactly as designed. A system where the task is unclear. The start is too big. The reward is too far. The alternative is too easy. Of course you delay. Anyone would. This is why willpower keeps failing. Because willpower is trying to override a system that keeps pulling you in the opposite direction. And systems are stronger than effort. Always. That's why you can feel motivated at night and completely different in the morning. Because motivation is a moment, but your system is constant. This is where the shift happens. You stop asking, why am I like this? And you start asking, what about this task is making my brain reject it? That question changes everything. Because now, procrastination is no longer a mystery. It becomes feedback, a signal, something you can actually work with. If the task is too vague, make it obvious. If it feels boring, make it more engaging. If it feels heavy, make it smaller. If it gives no reward, add one. This is not self-help. This is alignment. You are not forcing yourself to act against your nature. You are adjusting the task, so your brain stops resisting it. And once that resistance drops, something interesting happens. Action becomes easier than avoidance. That is the turning point. Not when you feel ready. Not when you become more disciplined. When the behavior stops feeling like a fight. But there is still one illusion left. Even if you remove resistance, even if you redesign your habits, even if you understand all of this, there is a belief that keeps people stuck. A subtle one. Dangerous because it sounds positive. The belief that you need to enjoy the process, that you need to feel motivated, that you need to love the routine. But what if that is completely wrong? What if discipline has nothing to do with liking what you do? In the next section, we break that illusion. And that is where everything becomes simpler. You're not going to like this. You don't need to enjoy the process. You don't need to feel motivated. You don't need to fall in love with the grind. You don't need to wake up excited to do hard things. That idea sounds good, but it quietly destroys people. Because when they don't feel that excitement, they assume something is wrong. They think, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I haven't found my passion. Maybe I'm just not disciplined enough. So they stop. Not because the path is wrong, but because it doesn't feel good. This is the trap. You've been taught that consistency should feel natural, that the right path should feel aligned, that if you don't enjoy it, it's not meant for you. But most of the things that build your life don't feel good at the start. They feel slow, repetitive, uncertain, and sometimes they feel pointless. That's normal. The problem is not the feeling. The problem is how much weight you give to it. Because if you rely on how you feel in the moment, you will keep choosing what is easy. And what is easy rarely builds anything meaningful. This is the shift. Disciplined people are not more motivated. They just don't treat their feelings as instructions. They feel the same resistance, the same doubt, the same lack of desire. But they don't stop there. They move anyway, not through force, through structure. This is what changes everything. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" they ask, "What happens next in my system?" And then they follow that, automatically, because the decision was already made. Not in the moment, but earlier, when they design their day. This is what most people miss. Discipline is not built in the moment of action. It's built in the moment of setup, before the resistance appears, before the excuses start, before your brain begins negotiating. That's where the real work happens. At night, when you prepare your environment, in advance, when you decide the next step, in small details that remove friction, because once the moment comes, you are not thinking, you are following. This is why structure beats motivation. Every time. Imagine two versions of you. One waits to feel ready. The other already knows what to do next. One negotiates. The other executes. One depends on mood. The other depends on design. Over time, they become completely different people. Not because one is stronger, because one removed the need to decide. This is the uncomfortable truth. You don't need to love discipline. You need to make the right actions easier to follow than to avoid. That's it. Not exciting, not dramatic, but effective. Because once the right behavior becomes the default, something shifts. You stop debating with yourself. You stop wasting energy on internal arguments. You stop starting and stopping over and over again. You just move. Even on bad days, especially on bad days. That's when structure matters most. Because when your energy drops, your system takes over. And your system doesn't care how you feel. It just runs. This is where people finally break out of the cycle. Not when they become more motivated, but when they stop needing motivation at all. And that leads to something deeper. Because if your actions can run without your feelings, then what actually defines you? Not your mood, not your thoughts, not your temporary motivation. Something else, something more stable, your identity. In the next section, we go there. Because real change doesn't happen when you force new actions. It happens when you stop seeing yourself as the person who avoids them. At this point, everything becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more pressure. You don't need to become a different person overnight. You need to change how your life is set up. That's it. Because once the structure changes, your behavior starts changing with it. So instead of trying to fix everything at once, you do something smaller, more precise. You redesign your day, one habit at a time. This is how it starts. You don't wake up and say, "I'm going to be disciplined now." You ask a better question. What is the easiest version of the right action that I can't avoid? That question matters. Because it removes fantasy and replaces it with something real. Not a perfect routine, a functional one. For example, you don't start with a 1-hour workout. You start with putting your shoes on at the same time every day. You don't start with deep focus for hours. You start with opening the document without touching your phone. You don't start with reading 50 pages. You start with 1 page. In the same place, every day. This is where people underestimate the process. They think small actions don't matter. But small actions remove resistance. And once resistance drops, consistency appears. This is the order. Not big effort, consistency, low resistance, repetition, identity. So you make things easier. You prepare your environment the night before. You remove obvious distractions. You make the first step visible. You reduce decisions. Because every decision you remove is energy you save. And saved energy is what allows you to stay consistent. Then you anchor the action. You attach it to something that already happens. After coffee, 1 page. After brushing teeth, 2 minutes of something important. After sitting at your desk, start immediately. No thinking, no delay, just sequence. This is how behavior stabilizes. Not through intensity, through repetition in the same place, at the same time, after the same cue, and then you add one more layer. You make it satisfying, not in a big way, just enough. You track it, you mark it, you see it, because your brain needs closure. It needs to feel that something was completed. That small signal is what makes it want to repeat the behavior again. This is how habits grow, quietly, without drama, without constant effort, just structure, repeated long enough to become normal. But there is one more piece, the part most people skip, because it feels abstract, but it changes everything. You stop focusing only on what you do, and you start paying attention to what it means. Every small action becomes a signal, a vote, not for results, for identity. When you act, even for 2 minutes, you are telling yourself something. I am the kind of person who shows up. I am the kind of person who starts. I am the kind of person who follows through. And the more you repeat that, the more it becomes real. Not because you say it, because you prove it. This is how confidence is built. Not from thinking, from evidence. And once that identity starts forming, something shifts again. You don't rely only on systems anymore. You begin to align with them, because now the behavior matches how you see yourself. And when that happens, consistency stops feeling forced. It becomes natural, not easy, but natural, like something that belongs to you. This is the integration. You are no longer fighting your brain. You are no longer waiting to feel ready. You are no longer depending on motivation. You are designing your life in a way that makes the right behavior easier to live out. And once that is in place, discipline is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that shows up as a side effect. In the final section, we close this, because there is one last shift, the one that turns all of this from something you understand into something you actually become. At the beginning, it felt like a personal failure, like something was wrong with you, like you were missing something other people had: discipline, consistency, control. But now you can see it differently. You were not broken. You were just fighting the wrong battle, trying to force behavior in a system that was designed against you. And every time you failed, you made it mean something about who you are. That's the part that does the real damage. Because once you believe, I'm just not disciplined, you stop trying in the right way. You either push harder and burn out, or you give up and confirm the belief. Both lead to the same place. Nothing changes. But now you have a different lens. You can see the pattern. Your brain prefers what is easy. Your environment shapes what is chosen. Your habits follow what is repeated. Your identity forms from what you do consistently. This is not a mystery anymore. It's a system, and systems can be changed. Not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately. One decision at a time, one setup at a time, one small action repeated, until it stops feeling like effort. This is where things shift quietly. Not in a dramatic moment, not in a burst of motivation, but in small changes that remove resistance from your life. You place the book where you can see it. You move the phone away from where you work. You prepare the next step before the day begins. Nothing impressive, but something important, because now the right action is easier to follow than to avoid. And when that happens, you don't need to push as much. You just move, even when you don't feel like it. Especially then. That's when the system proves itself. This is the part people don't talk about. Discipline doesn't feel powerful. It feels quiet, repetitive, simple, almost boring. But that's what makes it real. Because it doesn't depend on who you are, on your best day. It works even on your worst one. And over time, those small, repeated actions start doing something deeper. They change how you see yourself. Not through words, through evidence. You start to notice. You showed up. You started. You followed through. Maybe not perfectly, but consistently enough. And that is enough. Because identity doesn't change in one moment. It shifts with every action that matches it. So eventually, without forcing it, you stop asking, "How do I become disciplined?" And you start noticing. You already act like someone who is. Not all the time, but more than before. And that is how it begins. Quietly, without permission, without a dramatic turning point, without waiting to feel ready. Just a different way of living. A different way of setting things up. A different way of responding when the moment comes. So now there is only one real question left. Not about discipline, about action. What is the first thing you can make easier today? Not bigger, not perfect, just easier to begin. Because that is where everything you want actually starts. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And that power begins with how you design your actions.